More first responders die by suicide than are killed in the line of duty. What can be done? Let's talk about it with Robert Michaels on Steve Brown, etc.
He's an old white guy, an author, broadcaster, and seminary professor who's sick of religion. And he's brought friends. Please welcome Steve Brown, etc.
And we are so glad you're here. As I say often, we make sure that you have a place at our table. My name is Steve. I'm the aforementioned old white guy. And our resident mega church pastor, Zach Van Dyke, is here. Lately, Zach has been studying numbers, specifically the number of days until the election and the number of days until the end of 2020. Boy.
In the number of days until Jesus returns. All of it. Let's just
Wouldn't it be nice
come on,
if he
Jesus.
came back before the election?
What is that number?
I hope tomorrow.
Well,
Matthew Porter's with us. Matthew is raising his children to never take drugs. They can ask for them nicely, sure, but never just take them. That's rude.
I'm an old-fashioned guy.
Yeah. And our producer and audio guy, Jinx, is working hard in this little glass booth. Anytime someone says the phrase, mic drop, Jinx winces. He really does. And our video director, John Myers, is in his tech bunker. John is a car guy, and he's really into essential oils, like conventional S5W30 high mileage synthetic, right?
Oh, man.
Oh,
They
good
are
grief.
essential.
Did you even read that correctly?
No, I didn't, but I'm doing the best I can. Okay.
I love that he always butchers Matthew's best work.
Because I
It
never
creates the illusion that the
understood what
joke
he
was
wrote.
good in the first place.
Because he doesn't practice.
John, I'm a car guy too.
It doesn't help when I practice. It just gets worse. Dr. George Bingham is our boss. He's the president of Key Life. George's favorite type of investment, bonds, municipal bonds. And then, of course, Kathy Wyatt is the soft, feminine side of the program. Kathy has been baking so many fall-themed desserts for us. I expect we'll all soon have pumpkin spice diabetes. Not me, man. Pumpkin is like eating another vegetable, and I'd rather have a steak. But it is what it is.
Wait a second. What about the municipal bonds?
What?
Did you leave something out there?
No,
or what happened?
I've been watching James Bond movies, and so it's a little bit in the delivery. It's all on. It's all
yeah.
on.
You go to bed
I don't
early.
understand this. Our
bonds.
executive producer writes it, and I read it as
I have
best
to
I
edit it.
can, and
Steve,
that's all we can do. The first
they don't
one
get it-
was a mistake. The second one was unclear. And I
Listen, they don't get the material. That's on them, Steve. You're not going to dumb down.
it's not us, it's them.
Is it on them? Is it? I don't know.
Hey, listen, I've been looking forward to this program today. Rob Michaels, by the way, is the founder and CEO of Serve and Protect. And we're going to talk about that. He previously served as an MP with Norfolk, Virginia Police on patrol and with the Detective Bureau. Robert earned a BS from Columbia International University and an MA from Wheaton College. He serves as chaplain of the FBI Memphis Division, Nashville Resident Agency, chaplain for ATF Nashville region, and chaplain for the Brentwood Fire Department. And Rob, it's good to have you with us. It seems to me like you have plenty to do without adding to it. Tell us, give us an idea of what Serve and Protect is all about.
Well, I founded Serve and Protect. I'd been in the music business for 30 years with people like the Newsboys and DC Talk and Audio Adrenaline, more on the rock and roll side. And I could see that the Newsboys gig was coming to an end. I was sitting in church and I just asked God, I said, what do you want me to do? And Serve and Protect came to mind. And it's the culmination of 41 years of what I call a recalculated route. God taking me different places to equip me for what he wants me to do. But in 2011, we launched. And Serve and Protect is a nonprofit that provides trauma facilitation for anybody in public safety, police, fire, dispatch, corrections, EMT, as well as in April, we launched a medical division. And what that means is when they call in for help, we have a crisis line, 615-373-8000. And when they call in, we have peer advocates that answer the phone to determine what their need is. And if it's residential care, our partner, Safe Call Now, finds a residential facility suitable for first responders. Now, on our end of it, I've got two ladies, Cheryl and Christine, that are trauma service facilitators. They locate a trauma therapist in the city that the person lives, that takes their insurance, make sure that they're trauma informed. And we interview everybody we refer to make sure they understand the job of the person calling. Because if you're trying to talk to a police officer or a firefighter and you don't understand their mindset, you're going to think they're worse off than they really are. So we make sure we find that perfect fit. Then we make the referral. We've got a team of peer advocates and we assign one of those job specific to the caller, cop on cop, male on male, female on female. We get gender specific because it forms somewhat of an intimate bond when you're talking to somebody about life's troubles and what's going on in your life. So that peer advocate will stay with them until we locate the therapist. It may take a week, particularly these days, because therapists aren't always in their office. So we set up the therapist, we make the caller set up the appointment because they've got to have some skin in the game. Well, the peer advocate will call them back a week later. Did you make the appointment? Well, no, I couldn't do that. All right, I'm going to call you again next week. You need to make the appointment. If they do make it, then they'll find out how it went. Was it a good fit? Did you feel comfortable? Did you feel safe? Those things. And once we've established they're on the right path, then our peer advocate pulls out because we don't want the peer advocate to become a crutch. We want them talking to the therapist about what they see, what they've experienced. As a cop, you can't imagine the things that you see on the street. As a firefighter, all manner of carnage. The way they're treated nowadays was different than what it was when I was on. There was certainly that arrogant person that would come at you and call you certain things. But at the end of the day, most people had a respect for police. That's not true today. Back when I was on, politicians respected police. That's not true today. So our calls are up over 250%. Since 2011, we've put more than 6,500 people in trauma therapy. I've taken those suicidal calls. I had one that called and said, Rob, it was 2:00 on a Saturday morning when I used to have people call my cell phone. The operative term is used to. But he said, I'm going to eat my gun or come to Jesus. I said, well, how about I slip on some pants and we'll talk about option 2. Came down to my office and he became a Christian. He's alive and well today. His life was messed up for sure, but we get to help them knit their lives back together and identify what's going on. We offer a chaplain. We have spouse advocates for the spouse of a first responder. They're not taught what's going to happen when their first responder goes on the job. It changes them. I worked at Sears before I became an MP, and I was at J.C. Penney selling electronics when a buddy of mine recruited me to be a police officer. It's a whole different thing. And my life changed. I was trained by guys that came on in the 50s and 60s. So you can imagine the background. But God did something. He brought a partner into my life that absolutely changed who I was and what I became.
Oh, Rob, we'll, on the other side of the break, we've got a lot of questions. I want you to talk to us about why things have gone south as our culture deals with law enforcement. I want you to elaborate on what you said when you call physicians and counselors, because they don't understand a police officer or a firefighter. I want to find out what's different about them, and I want to hear some stories. Our guest is Robert Michaels. He's the founder and CEO of Serve and Protect, a vital organization in a culture that has decided we can defund police and do it ourselves and remain safe. That, frankly, is insane. Hey, you're listening to Steve Brown, etc. And our guest is Rob Michaels. He's the founder and CEO of a great organization, timely, so important in our time. It's called Serve and Protect. And they're reaching out to first responders, police officers, and firefighters, and those who are on the front line when we can't be, so we don't have to be. Rob, you were, something changed you. You were a very happy guy, a college dropout, having a fine life, selling electronics, and then Jesus screwed it up for you. What happened?
Well, it was a little later when he did that. I went on the police department, and like I said, I was trained by guys that came on in the 50s and 60s. So when you're of that generation, there's always the same answer to the question. If somebody smarts off to you, what do? You know, either a right hook or a left hook or a backhand. So that's what I was for the first year. And I was at the gas pumps one night, gassing up my car, and I was partnered with the guy that was a son of the chief of police. Because I was the junior guy, and people thought nobody wants to ride with the son of the chief. He might say something. And so we became partners. And Drew Grant was the real deal. When I went on the police department, I drifted in my faith. There's not a lot of support in that area. There wasn't then. And so we drove together. We talked a lot. My wife went to school where he went to school. He knew her. And so we got to be best friends. And we were out one night, and this kid smarted off and drew back like he was going to do something. And I grabbed him by the throat, and I drew back and got ready to hit him. And Drew put his hand on my shoulder, and he said, "What are you doing?" And that was weird, I got to say. And I looked at him. I said, "What do you mean? What am I doing? I'm going to hit him." He said, "Why don't you choose not to do that?" And I can tell you that was a crossroads. Had he not done that, I wouldn't be doing this. Drew was God's person at that moment. He was the one. And we can all be that one for somebody. But God used Drew, and I didn't hit the guy. And God started moving me in a different course. I went to the detective bureau. Drew went first, convinced him I wasn't quite insane, that I actually could be a nice guy. So I went up to the detective bureau, and that's where I ended up leaving and going to Bible college.
Okay. Listen, that makes sense. That's how you became a spiritual giant, right?
But
I'm not sure I'd go all the way to giant. Maybe Baby Yoda.
Before the show, you said you had hair like me. I see Nashville on your resume. You said like 4 or 5 bands. So were you a sound guy or a bouncer?
Could have been a bouncer, but was in marketing and public relations. I got DC Talk on the Tonight Show and Arsenio and Rolling Stone and People Magazine and stuff like that. And did a lot of work for the Newsboys. We put on several free concerts called something I forgot. That's a long time ago. But we did large free concerts that were evangelistic in nature. Thousands came to Christ. It was awesome.
Matthew?
Yeah, Rob, I wanted to ask about, the statistic at the top of the show that we had mentioned. It's worth mentioning again. That's on your website, that more first responders, cops, firefighters, folks taking the calls die by suicide than die in the line of duty, which is just astounding. You've touched on part of that equation, which is just the horrific things that they have to live through. It seems like another part of that equation would be the culture that maybe traditionally was not necessarily welcoming to talking about these things and processing this trauma. Is that accurate? Is that changing? What's a little bit of the backstory of that?
Yes and no. When I teach seminars, I talk about shame. We were trained by shame. Were any of you in the military? Okay. When you go into the military, how many of you watch Gomer Pyle?
Literally watched it yesterday.
Yeah. When Sergeant Carter would get right up in Pyle's face and start screaming at him?
Yes.
That's real. When you're in basic, if you mess up, that drill sergeant, you have to wipe your face off because of all of the spit flying out of his mouth. The point is, he will shame you in front of all of your peers for whatever you did, because when it comes up to do it again, you do it differently, because being shamed makes you think about what you're doing, because lives depend on you. Well, I went through the military like that. Then when I became a police officer, they trained the same way. And so you're trained to suck it up, to do your job. It's not like you can go to somebody and complain that the drill sergeant talked harshly to you. This isn't, participation trophy time. And so what happens is that fear of being shamed translates over into what happens emotionally. When you feel those things that you feel, when you see, you have to become somebody different. And what I mean by that, I call it a cast iron shield. When I saw dead bodies, it wasn't somebody's son or daughter. It was evidence. And, I saw a guy one time, I was on my way to work to the detective bureau, and I looked and there was a tanker laying across the interstate. So I ran around on the other side to see what was going on. And it was a man who jumped out of his tanker. Never should do that, but he did. And the tanker was laying on him from his waist down. Mm-hmm. And we were talking. He was lucid. So I had to run down. Back then, we didn't have cell phones, and I had to climb a fence, call 911, get back over there. But I talked to that man until they lifted the truck off of him, and he died immediately. When you see that stuff, when you experience that, it makes you somebody different. A TV guy wanted to get a close-up of him. We had a conversation, and he chose not to because it's who you become.
Yeah.
Wow.
Good night. I'll tell you, I've often thought that I would like to be a police officer. Then I became a pastor, and there's certain similarities.
Yes, there are.
Two. We're talking with Rob Michaels, and we're talking about police officers, firefighters, first responders, and the life they really live so we don't have to. We have a culture that has pretty much, and they're bad preachers and they're bad doctors and there's some bad police people too. But for the most part, these are people that have a thin blue line that protects us from absolute chaos and pain and failure. So we're talking with Rob about this subject, and we'll continue with it on the other side. Don't go anywhere. Hey, thanks for joining us on Steve Brown, etc. We're hanging out with Rob Michaels. You can keep up with him, by the way. You can go to serveprotect.org. That's serveprotect.org. And on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube at Serve Protect.
Rob, before the break, we were talking a little bit about the culture and how just to get the job done, you really do have to just push everything down and push through. But there's kind of collateral damage to that. But you're kind of touching on that the culture has started to shift a little bit and maybe started to recognize that folks need help with this.
There is now a greater focus on officer wellness. That includes physical, firefighters too, but for first responders, they want to address the emotional side of things. I've done seminars all over the place and have them online, but the FOP has a wellness division. The firefighter unions have stuff like that, and they're pushing talking to somebody, whether it's a peer or they have employee assistance programs. The problem is nobody wants to talk to their organization about what they perceive as a weakness. Remember, they're trained, don't say anything. And so that's why we exist, is they know they can call us and talk about stuff. So over the past 10 years, I've seen it shift more towards getting help. There's still some issues with departments being willing to refer to people outside of VAP if they know the person isn't going to ask for help internally. But we're getting there. But there's a greater emphasis toward helping people.
Yeah. Zach?
Hey, Rob, I was, as you were talking, just feeling the weight of responsibility that these men and women carry every day, and especially in our cultural context right now, and kind of what all is happening in the conversation and on the news. So I guess my question to you as a pastor, when I see a cop or when I see a police officer or any believer sees a cop or a firefighter, what's something that we can do to just be an encouragement to them?
The first thing is pray. We assume Christians pray for police, but that begins with churches. We need to have churches proactively, Sunday morning, when you pray for the leaders in the nation, pray for those that protect us. When calls come in, I used to take the calls myself. I have now 2 people that are doing that. But our practice is to say to them, do you come from a faith background? And they might say, no, why? Well, I do. And I can tell you that it helped me. Well, how so? well, it opens that door. If they say, no, I don't, then we just move on and trust God to open that door during the conversation. Because we have more than 100 chaplains that we can get on the phone and have them talk with them if they come from a faith background. That's part of what we call 360 care. We can do spouse advocates, we can have chaplains, but, churches could even do, I'm relaunching a Bible study that I did for 4.5 years. It was called Guns and Hoses. You can go ahead and laugh. Yeah. But we would meet, and it was tough getting everybody to meet at the same time. So now it's going to be Zoom. But it's to get people together because there are believers out there on the street. The problem is, like me, I was going to the church where my fiance's dad was the pastor. I learned what it meant to be a Christian. When I went on to the department, there was not that support. I had to work Sundays, and that happens a lot. So you just start drifting. So there are Christians there that are disenfranchised from church. So maybe the church could, there's an article coming out soon in the FOP magazine addressing this, but churches could do things like have an alternate time where first responders can attend. You could start a Bible study for police and firefighters, have a couple of firefighters and police officers involved as the core group. Be there for them. Do ride-alongs. Go to the police department and say, I'd like to ride with you guys and just see what it's all about. You could be a chaplain for the department. A lot of times they don't want to talk to the actual chaplain because who picked the chaplain?
Right.
Chief. So, one thing we are considering, I'm praying about, and that is starting a segment. We've got medical staff now, is starting something for pastors because they have nobody.
Huh. So I wasn't that far off when I said there wasn't a lot of difference between being a pastor and a policeman. They just don't let you carry a gun unless you do it in secret if you're ordained. But I frankly think that some of the training you received would have helped me as a pastor. Guys, we're talking to Rob Michaels, and we're talking about an important subject. We live in a time when there's a lot of hurt and a lot of pain almost everywhere, and certainly with first responders. And Rob Michaels knows more about this than anybody I know, so we need to listen up as he tells us his story and their story. Don't go away. Hey guys, we're so glad you're here. And if you've listened this far, then you must like us, sort of. So be sure and find us on iTunes, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, and Spotify, and give us as many stars as you like, as long as it's 5. And every time you give us 5 stars, you get 3 free sins. And that ought to be enough encouragement.
Rob, it seems like the police are in the news a lot recently, and mostly portrayed in negative ways, and highlighting the problem areas, and maybe that 1 or 2 bad cops, if you will, in spite of the 99% of good cops. And it seems like such a contrast from, say, right after 9/11, with the tragedies there and the first responders being, constantly reinforced in their heroism and the positive feedback toward them and the support and so forth. And then a relatively few years later, and they're talking about defunding the police and how bad the police are and so on and so on. What are you seeing from your perspective in that? What's the impact of that on the police in particular?
It's gotten crazy. There was a riot in Oakland because police were chasing a suspect and the suspect killed himself. It was suicide. But in their minds, the police shouldn't have been chasing him. We have attained what Saul Alinsky wanted in our culture. Saul Alinsky in the 60s told the crazy radicals, take over education, government, entertainment, media. That's why we're seeing such a slant. So the 24-hour news cycle has changed everything. The advent of Marxist organizations rioting in our city streets is not coincidence. It is a planned and orchestrated thing. When you see rioters pull up in a U-Haul truck and big white vans and pull out pre-printed signs, that wasn't spontaneous. So one of the key Marxist elements is to get rid of law enforcement. And so anything that they can try and blame on law enforcement, they will. And their minions will riot. So you've got police officers now that are saying, why do I want to stay on this job? Resignations that are an all-time high. Retirements, if they can retire, they're getting out. And recruitment, good luck with that. I mean, they're trying to do anything they can to bring people on. It's far worse than it was in the 70s. And you're right, after 9/11, let me tell you, when you see what happened at 9/11 and the heroism of first responders going in till today, where they want to take money from police and send in social workers. We just lost a police officer yesterday, I believe, that went to a domestic disturbance. Before he could get out of his car, he was shot in the head. Now, what will a social worker do? Wet their pants. I mean, we're living in a society where we as a culture have got to stand up against a Marxist mentality that wants to destroy our government, destroy our educational systems. It's sad to me to see the statues that are tumbled over that were historic figures. All of this impacts law enforcement because law enforcement is the glue that holds our society together. And the government should be right there with them without becoming an advocate for any candidate. What I will say is ask yourself when you vote, does this person support the military? Will this person support law enforcement? Because those are two critical issues. If our nation can't be safe, we can't be a nation. And the other thing I would say, please pray for those people out there on the front lines. I became a fire chaplain because I went in to talk to the chief to say hi. And I saw sitting in front of me bulletproof vests for the fire department. Because think about who's the first one on the scene sometimes. Firefighters. And I said, how's it going? I said, how's your chaplain doing? He goes, I don't know. I haven't seen him in 10 years. I said, okay, let me find you one. He goes, why don't you do it? It's hard for me to say no in a situation like that. Now, COVID changed everything. I couldn't go over to the FBI building. I couldn't go over to the fire departments. We're just now getting back to normal. But these guys need to know we care. They need to know that especially the church is a safe haven. I actually had a pastor call me and ask me, Rob, we got a cop comes to our church, and when he comes to see his daughter do things, he's in uniform, he's got his gun on. Can I ask him not to carry his gun? I said, no, but I'm not the chief. Let me call. So I called the chief and asked him, and I couldn't tell the pastor what the chief said. But the way I explained it is, some bad guy comes into your church, police officer there with no gun. Who's the first one to die? Police officer. Then he kills other people. Who's going to get sued? You, because you told the cop to not come in with a firearm. That got his attention, because no pastor wants to be sued. We've got to change our mindset about what we're seeing. We're not just seeing naughty people. We're seeing evil perpetrated in our country, and we have got to pray over our law enforcement. Let me tell you, we do what we do because this is God's call on my life. We don't charge a dime for what we do. And it's because I believe that God wants us to be there for them in their moment of need. And I'm 70. I'm working on this so it's self-sustaining, so that when I'm gone, there's somebody else to carry on.
Rob, we're just about out of time, and this has been an informative hour. We could do a bunch more. Sometimes we're going to have you back to talk about these issues again.
I love it.
If that's okay. And by the way, what you're doing is so important, so relevant. We rise up and call you blessed, and I didn't know anybody was doing this. And you are, and we're glad for you and what you go, brother. You're doing a good thing.
Thank you.
Folks, Rob Michaels has been our guest, Serve and Protect. You can find that on Google. You can check out the website and Twitter, and you ought to check on it. Find out what's really going on. And we're going to come back, and we'll tell you who we're going to do it unto next week. You'll be surprised. You're listening to and have been listening to Steve Brown, etc. And we had a great guest in Rob Michaels. I think sometimes when you're on the outside, and that doesn't matter where that is, being on the outside means you don't understand what's going on the inside. That has to do with the Black community, our African-American brothers and sisters. It has to do with pastors, clergy types. It has to do with teachers. It has to do with police officers and firefighters and first responders. And sometimes you got to go, and not with an agenda, but with the intentional effort of listening to the heart, trying to discern where the pain is. And you're not God and you can't fix it, but you can stand beside somebody who's hurting. You can listen. You can affirm their value, created in the image of God. And things are really bad right now for some of us, and that would be the first responders. They're hated in some circles. They're rejected in others. They're avoided in other places. And we as Christians have a responsibility, not only there, but in a lot of places, to be agents of reconciliation and healing. And Rob has given us some good ideas on how to do that. Some of that will work in a lot of areas. And I didn't say it, Jesus said it. And we don't get to vote on it. So we are those agents, ambassadors, Paul said, for Christ in a world that's evil and confused and lost and dark. And we are too, but we can see some light and we can point people to it. And Rob is doing that. You ought to say a prayer for him. And then Kathy, who's
Yes.
going to be with us next week.
Well, next week we have a lady with us. Her name is Marcy Henna, and she did write a novel back a little while ago called When We Last Spoke, and it has now become a motion picture. And there's a couple of exclusive release dates. October 27 and 28. I'm not exact. Matthew knows more about like when they do small releases and then later it gets expanded or whatever. But anyway, it's coming up, and she had some pretty significant people, some well-known actors and actresses that are a part of the movie. So Matthew's going to be host next week since this is his area of great expertise.
And I'm going to rest up because I'm old.
Yeah, because you're old and tired.
But I'm going to be here. I'm just going to listen. I'm not going to be on camera or saying anything. Between now and then, you be here too. And don't do anything we wouldn't. And that gives you a wide, wide berth.